Who was El Chapo?
El Chapo was a part of the leadership, or at least a faction of the leadership in the cartel. It's a federation of different of small organizations. Well, I'd say small organizations, basically families or organizations that conform this larger group, which is the Sinaloa cartel that is based out of Sinaloa. Basically, they are people that have family and power nucleuses there in Sinaloa. I mean, who was he? I think he was a high level operator for the Sinaloa cartel. He had his own drug routes, his own networks. His family nucleus down there is still in control of some of those operations. So his arrest really didn't change anything. But he wasn't the mastermind number one leader that I think the media and the government kind of portrayed him as.
Who was the mastermind?
If you go down there and you read what most of the brave journalists in Mexico that we have say, another aspect of this war is that a lot of journalists get killed. I think Mexico has some of the top numbers in the world. And this is no secret to anybody. El Mayo Zambada is the name of the historical figurehead of this cartel, or at least somebody who people theorize or suspect to be the main guy or the main person that is in charge of some of this criminal group.
Is he still alive?
That's the going rumor, that he's still very much alive. And the interesting thing about him is that he learned his craft in Los Angeles. So people thinking that Sinaloa cartel isn't a Mexican thing. It's actually he apparently learned a lot of his craft from people in the United States,
And that's the craft of leadership, the craft of business, which aspect of the craft?
The craft of getting a product from Colombia, putting it through Mexico, and
the logistics.
The logistics part of it.
And he somehow is operating in the shadows. So he's not a known entity.
I don't have a clear number of this, but he was interviewed by a magazine called Proceso in Mexico. And some pictures were taken of him. This was over 10 years ago, probably. And that's the last time anybody's ever seen a picture of him.
What's it like to be a journalist in that? So can a journalist have a conversation with him and live?
Not unless he asks to have that conversation. I think he reached out to this journalist to talk about it. There's a media wing to the work that we do, a sister page called Demoler. And it's run by some pretty good people. And the way we met is that I was basically training them how to work in hostile environments. And they were like, "Oh, we're going to go report on cartel activity in Mexico." And I was like, that is a year and a half ago. A reporter went to the president's daily briefing, press conference that he has. They call them La Mañaneras. The president, Manuel López Obrador, and told him to his face, like, I have threats on my life. They're trying to kill me. And it happened. There's been a slew of assassinations and murders of members of the press all over Mexico. It's not an easy job. Either they say too much or they say things that favor one side or the other, which is another aspect of it that is interesting. I don't consider myself a reporter. I don't report on the news in Mexico. I have friends that do that very well. I commentate on some of it only. But you see a lot of these cartel reporters go down there, talk to a specific side, and basically speak one side of the story. And that is not something that the other side wants. If you go down there and speak to one side, you're saying what they want people to know or hear. So in a way, you're kind of spreading some of their cartel propaganda in a way. And that's how some people, get shot.
Do you think it's possible to go in there and have a conversation with a cartel leader?
Well, Sean Penn,
or somebody like me, for somebody like Sean Penn.
This is what I will say. After that whole Sean Penn thing, I think a lot of people would reconsider a meeting with anybody of any level that has any notoriety here in the United States. They wouldn't trust anybody to get that close. There are people out there that will talk to reporters, people that are working on a laboratory somewhere in a hillside somewhere down south, in the Sierra. low-level people that get authorization to speak to reporters and stuff like that, but they don't say anything that isn't being taught or shown in their various different ways or outlets out there for them. I mean, some of these guys have Instagram accounts, some of these guys that blog about it,
but not the leaders.
TikTok, no, not the leaders. I think after what happened to El Chapo Guzman, I think that opportunity, that window was closed for some of the leadership down there.
I think I disagree. I think they're just more sensitive, realizing that there has to be a deep trust. It's not just anybody and not any high profile. I've gotten a chance to speak to some very high profile leaders that don't speak to journalists, and they understand the value of trust.
If they have something to say, which I don't think they do, I don't think they, unless at some point in the future, which is something I suspect might be coming, that there is some sort of armed intervention and or external attack on some of these criminal groups that really puts the pressure on them.
You don't think there's a human aspect to this, of a human being wanting their story to be known versus this is different than the propaganda machine of, I have something to say, I have some message to put out there to play the game of politics and power and money and all that kind of stuff. Isn't there also a human being underneath all that armor that for the sake of perhaps ego, legacy, wants to be understood?
I think in a way they already do that. There's corridos, which are basically Mexican folk songs that get sung about, some of them. So in a way, some of these singers are reporting on some of their lives, and it's a great honor to have a corrido made about you. Somebody made a corrido about me based on my interviews, right? Yes. I didn't pay for it, so it's a real one. Yeah, it feels cool.
So
right?
Creating a myth, the legend of the man.
I think it's about. I think a way you can find somebody like that is somebody that wants to get their story specifically clear and straight. Coming from that culture and getting to work for the government down there, and then not working for the government down there, and being on the outside, being critical of not only the government that is in place now, but also the government that I actually work with. I can tell you that there's villains all over the place down there. Everybody's a villain, at all levels in some way, shape, or form. And some of these people, I think in a way, including El Chapo, I think that some of that meeting was about film rights and stories and being able to get his story out there. I think I'm not too sure because I wasn't there, but I suspect that some of that was going on. If you can bring an honest voice down there they can trust to put that out there, I mean, I think you could try.
I'm interested in that kind of thing. Because ultimately, in some of those places, like inside a cartel at the very top, is when you can really look at the raw aspects of human nature in a way you can't necessarily elsewhere.
There's a youth coming into power down there. And when I say a youth, I mean some of the old guard is going out and some of the new guard is coming in. An example of this is El Chapo Guzman's sons, who are now in their own right kind of gaining legendary status. His son, there was an attempted arrest on his son that led to the famous Culiacanazo incident, which we are now learning more about because some of the Guacamaya leaks are kind of speaking more about what happened that day. Basically a federal operation to arrest El Chapo Guzman's son turned into a siege to try and get him free. They called in the cavalry. Basically, the whole of the Sinaloa cartel showed up to try and rescue him. Interesting thing about that is, in reading some of the documents and also just seeing some of the videos and stuff like that came out of that incident, the cartels were the ones evacuating the citizenship from the area. They were the ones going restaurant to restaurant, saying, hey, if you want to exit the city, go through here, take your families, get down, but you have to leave because the army's coming here. They're going to fight us.
So there's like a deep morality to all of that. Underneath the violence, there's a humanity.
I mean, it's their home.
Yeah.
It is their home. And they were fighting for their home, and they were fighting for leadership from their home. There is a morality. There is a humanity there. And again, I don't. If people want to paint them all with the villainy aspects, everybody's a villain in somebody else's story, if you kind of look at it that way.
People should check out your Patreon. You should check out your field notes. You're a really good writer. Your Instagram too. You have a quote in your field notes about villains. Quote, I once worked for a villain, a savior to some and a biblical demon of old to others, a true product of his environment. He was the best and the worst of us. We're all potential villains in someone else's story, he would say to us as we would head out into the unknowns that the night had waiting for us. It was during one of these nights that I looked around me and saw horns and pitchforks among my people and realized what he meant. We were no knights of the round table. Whatever we were needed. In the end, I guess that justified most of what was about to happen. Do you think El Chapo, do you think people like him are good or evil?
I think there's no one without the other. I think there's a cost to their goodness that they do. The roads they build, the hospitals, the career paths that they pay for. There are doctors in Mexico that their careers were paid for by some of these groups, and they do a lot of amazing good for the community. I remember there was a surgeon reconstructing cleft palates. In one of my travels that I did out there, I spent some time actually going out there after I got out of the job to train people and the type of stuff that I show people. And they told me, like, I told them, like, you're doing God's work. This stuff is like legit. This is God's work. Building smiles for people. And it's like, yeah. And then, can I talk to you? Yeah. He said, my career path was paid for by Cartel, a group of Cartel members. They paid for my career path because they wanted somebody on hand that could fix their teeth.
Do you think some aspect of that is just sort of manipulative control, or is some of it also just, again, a care for the population, for fellow human beings that are one of your own?
I think both. I think there's, again, it's hard to just make them saints or devils. The some of the good they do in some of their communities and don't ask anything for in return. And even if they don't ask it for anything in return, where the military shows up, they are immediately met with rocks and roadblocks, and everybody's main weapon down there, since most Mexicans can't buy or own firearms, their main weapon down there is silence and their eyes to report to the people that they consider the good guys in their environment, right? So that's a hard question, I think there's a bit of both, and both the government and the criminal groups that are operating down there.
Silence is their main weapon. So El Chapo is currently in prison. Is he worth talking to?
I'd say yes.
Is there things that to you are interesting about him that are still not understood? Is he a window into something that you don't understand about that world still? Or are curious about in that world?
I think he's a window into the family dynamics of that world. When I say family dynamics, Mexico has a big thing about compadres, and hermanos. Like, we have people that we call family that are not necessarily our family. He is somebody that witnessed the construction of what is now the Sinaloa cartel. Like, he was in it way back when. He started off as a farmer and then went into trafficking. He's from a town called Bandiraguata, which is basically, that's the Wakanda of cartels. Basically, that's where a lot of that originates. The things that he saw as far as how some of these things got built, I think would be an interesting topic of conversation with somebody like him.
So that story is a story of evolving family dynamics. So part of the story of the cartel is individual humans
marrying other families, getting named padrino, basically godfathers to other people's kids, forming family and blood ties and influence ties to people not only in Mexico but in the United States. It's seeing how that dynamic and family dynamic is still there. So he's gone, he's in prison, but he's probably on his way to be our next clandestine saint. You go to the chapel of Malverde, Malverde is basically a Mexican Robin Hood, the folk saint down there, who is a saint of traffickers. And at his shrine, you have a small little Chapo shrine right next to it. So he's on his way to sainthood in Mexico. Not recognized by the Catholic Church, but that doesn't matter in Mexico anymore. Speaking to somebody like him, who you can consider him somebody that lost, he's arrested, but his family's okay. His legacy is out there. He's going to be named. He's probably going to be the next folk saint when he passes away.
Do you think he feels like the new wave of what the cartel has become has betrayed him, has left him behind? Or because it seems like the way the cartel operated has changed over the decades.
Yeah. Well, number one, their power and influence is bigger. There are Sinaloa cartel operations in Colombia, straight to in the source of it, and then there are clear. They have a clear presence in places like Chicago and Los Angeles. They're in the United States. The whole thought process that a lot of Americans have, like, we don't want that trouble over here. We don't want them to get here, or build a wall and all this.
So they're deeply integrated into legitimate businesses.
I mean, they've been having kids and families up here for a long time. Some of these people have American passports that work not only directly for them, but have blood ties down there. There's been dragnets and arrests of some of these criminal organizations stateside. New Generation Cartel had 1, 2, 3 years ago where I think it's Operation Anaconda, I think it was called. They arrested over 80 of their operatives. And this is a new cartel that is very militaristic and growing in Mexico. And they had over 80 arrests in the United States, that of members of them operating here.